Hold it 1 second. There was no question that what they're eating was not good. Was it not good because it didn't taste good, or was it not good because there was something that was killing them? So a lot of people have kind of tried to figure out what's going on here with the food, especially people who are foodies and people who like to watch the food channel, Cooking Network, whatever, all those different food channels. What's going on here? Because we don't have a lot of details on cooking in the Bible, but it says people are sitting down and eating. Here it actually says there's some recipe here. There's some foods in here. What's going on with the wild gourds? Some people say that it's some kind of mushrooms. And if you pick wild mushrooms and you're not exactly sure what you're picking,
you're going to have a lot of fun.
You could die. You could have a lot of fun. That's what Marcia said. You can have a lot, but you could also die. So there is a chance that some of the mushrooms they picked were not good. So this is
Gourds. Yeah. You don't eat gourds, right? I mean, they're hard.
Yeah, but it's a translation. So this is the translation, right? So this is a translation for a word that could be vegetables. It could be gourd. It could be herbs. So all of these are sometimes translations that you say. What do you have translated there? Gourds. Reverend Lynn's got gourds. Mary's not here with her King James, but I have a feeling it's gourds. But it is clear that he's out there picking stuff out of the ground. But these are prophets. They're not chefs. They're not people who necessarily know. Yeah, they don't know. Now, again, hello, we read at the very beginning, there's a famine in the land, which means people are scrounging around looking for food, right? They're literally scrounging for food. So guess what? That happens in times of famine and people not knowing where to get food. They try to get anything. So they got the wrong stuff. They did not have Uber Eats then. Well, we'll get to that. We didn't get to it. So he said, we're getting to that. So wait, here we go. So here's how Elisha, this is a miracle on a small scale. Let's put it that way, but it helps the people who are here with them right now. Here's what happens.
Fetch some flour, Elisha said. He threw it into the pot and said, serve it to the people and let them eat. And there was no longer anything harmful in the pot.
Okay, so there you go. So his cure for it is to throw some flour into it. And again, all we know is the word kemach, which is flour, some type of flour. I mean, could have been. No, it could have been, yeah. Well, no, it's all right. It could have been whatever. It could have been ground something, whatever. It's some kind of ground, but usually it's the word used for wheat flour or grain flour. So he throws it in there and then the people can eat it. So it's a very small scale miracle in the sense that it's in the pot. That's it. There's a pot, he cures it. But the good news is people can eat, and it's, in a famine, that this is a big deal. This is not a little, it's not little for the people who are there at the moment. But again, this is for a group of people right there in one moment, and he does a miracle. Is this worthy of being in the Bible? I don't know. It is. It shows you that Elisha did stuff on a small scale. Maybe he did other stuff on a small scale. These are all kinds of things that we can wrap our heads around. We'll get to some of these other miracles and then kind of maybe it'll come together a little bit. But, he brought one kid back to life. It's not a huge, thing. It was a big thing for that woman and her son who got brought back to life. It's not a crossing of the Red Sea miracle, but it is real important for the people who are affected by it. But again, as I mentioned before, as we get closer to the time that the Bible was written and composed and edited, the miracles become less and less public, and they become less and less, to some extent, the effect of these miracles becomes smaller and smaller. There's less and less people that see it. There's less and less people that are affected by it. And again, some people speculate, it's easier to say this thing happened when no one's there to see it. But look, I mean, for the people who are there at the moment, clearly it was important and the legend of this spread. So this is one thing connected to food. But wait, there's more. If you order now,
A
More
man
food.
came from Baal Shalisha, and he brought the man of God some bread of the first reaping, 20 loaves of barley bread, and some fresh grain in his sack. And Elisha said, "Give it to the people and let them eat." His attendant replied, "How can I set this before 100 men?" But he said, "Give it to the people and let them eat. For thus said the Lord, they shall eat and have some left over."
now.
So he set it before them, and when they had eaten, they had some left over, as the Lord had said.
Yeah. So Mike's first question is, who's this guy, right? Who's this guy who brings the food? Let's see. Let's see if any of the commentaries will make you feel a little bit better. There it just says, doesn't even answer who the man. Rashi doesn't answer who the man is. Let's just see if there's any. Let's see if there's any Talmud. I don't think I've ever heard the. I don't think I've ever heard a Talmudic. No, Radak just says here. Well, maybe just from the place, from Baal Shalisha, that place. It just talks about the place. So the miracle of feeding people bread, and they say, well, we don't have enough food, right? So, and this is why I said it's great to have Reverend Lynn here today, because of course, there's a very famous Christian version of this story.
I'm just gonna tell you, with Jesus, but Jesus comes into the picture about when?
About 800 years later. So let's take a look real quick at the story that you all know, because wait, you're not Christian, but you all know, well, Reverend Lynn, but you all know this story. Why? Because it's such a famous story. And why is the story so famous to some extent? There's a reason for it, by the way. It is, very importantly, it's one of the only stories in the Christian Bible. It's actually the only miracle in the Christian Bible besides Jesus' resurrection that's in all four Gospels. Now, if you want to talk about, well, that's not really a big deal. It's a big deal. Because there's not many things that are, period, that are in the four Gospels, right? So this story was critical for Christianity. It was critical in that for the mind of the people who are telling Jesus' story, for this to have happened. Or again, for a version of the story to have happened. Why? Because definitely it connects them to Elisha and Elijah. It connects them to these people. So I'm just going to show you one of the Christian versions. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Yes. No, right? Elijah is Elisha's teacher, right? He's his mentor. And so Elisha's continuing these miracles. What's interesting about this, though, Cheryl, which you remind people, whether they were here or not, is that there's a connection between Elijah and Elisha, right? Elijah teaches Elisha, and Elijah is considered, to some extent, again, the person, at least in the Christian Bible, who announces the coming of the Messiah. What's interesting is the Christian Bible, several places, says that John the Baptist is Elijah. What's interesting about no, but he functions in that way, right? He functions as the announcer, right? Because we read in Malachi, as I shared with you, that Malachi says that Elijah is going to announce that great and awesome day of the coming of the Messiah. So because that exists in Malachi, it was very important for Jews, and it was very important then for Christians. So here we have this story from, as I said, the miracle of the loaves, as it's called. What's interesting about this miracle, at least is the way it appears in the book of Matthew, and as I said, it's in all the Gospels. But if you look at Matthew, it says right here, I'll read you the story. And when it was evening, his disciples came to him saying, "This is a desert place and the time is now past. Send the multitude away." Well, first he heals people. I should say Jesus is healing people I'm going to tell you the story and then we'll go back and look at the story. And I want to tell you why. So it was evening, the disciples came to him saying, this is a desert place and the time is now past. Send the multitudes away that we may go into the village, so that they may go into the villages and buy themselves victuals so they can get fed. But Jesus said to them, they do not need to depart, give them food to eat. And they said unto him, I guess I'm reading King James here. They said unto him, we have but 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And he said, bring them here to me. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass. And he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and brake and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And they did all eat and were filled. And they took up the fragments and remained 12 baskets full. And they that had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So there he feeds 5,000 people. So Elisha does a miracle of feeding a lot of people. This is even bigger. Jesus feeds 5,000. And again, what's the critical part of this story? There's food left over. And it's the same words. There was food left over. So clearly, this story is based on the Elisha story. There's no question, right? There's no question. Here's a prophet. I got to feed the people. In this story, he breaks it up and gives the people, and they're still left over. And again, the fact that there's 12 baskets is the 12 tribes, right? It's representing the 12 tribes. So there's no question that this is based on a Jewish story.
Okay, so Jesus is 800 years or 800.
Yeah, 800 years later.
So Jesus is retelling the story.
His followers are retelling the story.
His followers. So 800 years it went forward. Oh, yeah. The story is retold and retold.
No, but this is a version of the Elisha story.
Torah's already written.
The Torah is already written. People know the story. They know about Elisha and Elijah, and they know the story. They're all familiar with the story. But now they have an Elisha in their own day.
Yes.
Now, I also said there's an Elijah part of this. There's a big Elijah part to it, because the part that I'm going to now show you is what happens just before this story. What?
That also,
Yeah, sure.
I'm thinking that also the selflessness of probably they eat at a fight, right? To make it go further.
Well, I will tell you this, Marcia. Part of the point is that they ate, and it was a miraculous amount of food. That the food was not supposed to last that long. So it says that they ate and were. I think it actually says, Marcia, that they ate, and
So they ate enough. I'm thinking they've all given up something.
it says they were ate and they were filled. There you go. So let's look at the setup for this story, because I think the setup for this story is really interesting too, given the Elisha and Elijah connection. Because look at the story that happens. Right before that, we read about John the Baptist, which is Elijah. He's risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works would show themselves to him. But the problem is, they're saying that Jesus is actually John the Baptist. But they just said he's dead. Now, we didn't know he's dead. The Christian Bible didn't tell us yet he's dead, but now they're going to tell us how he is dead. Now, this story is very famous too. And even if you're not Christian, you probably know this story, because this is the story of Salome, the beautiful Salome. So here's the story, at least the way the Christian Bible puts it, which is a little different than the way Josephus tells the story. But Josephus tells the story too, and he goes on and on and on about the story. He's very interested in the story. So it says right here, John the Baptist was dead. Well, here they're going to tell how. For Herod had laid hold on John and bound him and put him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife. Now, this is not Herod, this is Herod's son, right? These are 2 of Herod's sons. He has 2 sons. He has 4 sons, actually. These are 2 sons in particular. And clearly what's going on here in this story is there's some love stuff going on here. It's bizarre love stuff, and it's definitely, and Josephus gives much more detail. I'll show it to you if we have time. It's a very weird story. John had said to him, it is not lawful for you to have her. Why? Because he's married to your brother. You're not allowed to marry somebody's You're not allowed to marry your sister-in-law. You're not allowed to take her away and marry her.
Unless the husband died.
Yeah, which didn't happen. So John frowns on that type of behavior. Why? Because John is telling people, you got to stop doing the wrong thing. And you have these kings that are doing the wrong thing. Now, by the way, this assumes, I will say something interesting about this story. This assumes that Herod and his family had to live according to Jewish law, by the way, which is interesting because we don't always think about the Herod kings were living according to Jewish law, but at least John thought he should, and maybe other Jews assumed that they were going to live by Jewish law. We hear that they do adhere to Jewish law. They are Idumean, by the way. They are not Judean, the Herod kings. Yeah. Herod's grandfather was Idumean. His father, Herod's father, Antipater, is raised as a Jew, but they were forcibly converted by the Maccabean kings. These were not Judean people by Judean origin. They're an interesting story, yeah. But Herod had married into, and some of the other family had married into the Maccabean dynasty. So some of these women that they're married to, some of these people that we're reading about are actually Herodias, for example. These are Jewish women, in some cases Maccabean queens and princesses that they marry into. But that being said, they do adhere to Jewish law. From what we know, King Herod the Great, the one who kills people by the thousands.
He was a puppet of Rome.
He was a puppet. He was loyal to Rome, and he did what Romans said. But the Romans famously said about Herod that it was better to be a pig of Herod's than his kids, because he wouldn't kill pig, but he would kill his kids, and he did kill two of his sons. So that's why they would joke about Herod. It's better to be his pig than his sons. But so that means he adhered to some extent to Jewish law. But again, not a good person, and his family also continued to that. So here's a very famous scene, because we have the dance of the seven veils coming up here. It says that John would have put him to Herod would have put John to death. He feared the multitude because they counted him as a prophet. So the people, according to the Christian Bible, the people loved John the Baptist. But when Herod's birthday was kept, the daughter of Herodias, who we know as Shalomit or Salome, danced before him, and it pleased Herod. This whole thing is just horrific, right? Dancing before her uncle, and whereupon he promised with an oath to give her whatever she would ask. And she, being instructed by her mother, said, "Give me here John the Baptist's head on a plate, on a charger." You know that story. So it's a pretty graphic story, and a lot of pictures of it in art. You can see it in the museum.
John the Baptist lived many years before Jesus.
No, not that long. A little bit before. He overlapped it, right? They overlapped. Yeah.
Scripture
Yeah.
says he was a cousin. contemporary.
There are versions of the story that they are cousins. And the king was sorry, nevertheless, for the oath's sake, and them which sat with him at meat, he commanded it to be given to her. And he sent and beheaded John in the prison, and his head was brought in a charger and given to the damsel, and she brought it to her mother. Wow, happily ever after. So John loses his head because of this family. Yes, the plate, the big plate. And his disciples came and took up his body and buried it and went and told Jesus. And when Jesus heard of it, he departed then by ship into a desert place apart. And that's where we went to the story. He's running away. Jesus gets out of town when John dies. So did he take a ship down to on the Dead Sea, on the Jordan? Where did he go? Well, we don't know exactly where this miracle happens, but wherever it happens while he is fleeing from the king, which is very much what happened to Elijah when he was trying to get away from Ahab. So these stories are repeating in Jesus's time. And the story about John the Baptist being executed is in Josephus's text as well, pages on it. And so Josephus attests to this story and basically says that John the Baptist was a very powerful and very, very prominent and well-known person.
And he thought he was the Messiah.
Many people thought he was the Messiah. And when he got executed, at least it seems from this story that Jesus feels that he could be next, which is why it says he leaves. And it says he's hiding.
Jesus leaves them, flees, and yet when things heat up, he heads into Jerusalem.
Yeah. But what's interesting about, at least about this story, and again, this is the setup for the story. I only went back for you to see that there's an Elijah type connection to this story. This story is an important part of establishing Jesus's, yeah, the fact that he has these powers that the ancient prophets had. So the prophets had these powers. If Jesus has these powers, then he's following in their footsteps.
So he had to just go regroup, so to speak, maybe? He had to
Maybe.
travel, he had to find his way.
Wherever he is, just understand that what he's doing is replaying these biblical stories. And again, I'm not sharing this with you so that you can say, well, it happened before, whatever. I'm telling you that this is critical for the Christian story, that Jesus does these types of miracles that were already established. These were established miracles that, he's reenacting. And so there's a power to this reenactment that, if people don't know the story from Kings, they don't get that story. And I share it with you because, again, some of these stories are very well known. The multitude, the feeding the multitudes, that's just a basic, that's a basic Christian story. I mean, I don't know, you teach that to kids when they're 5 years, whatever, Sunday school, right? That's an early Sunday school teach. So, I mean, Reverend, how important is that story? What would you say?
It's very central, absolutely. And it links it to the Eucharist.
Uh-huh. Which is, again, the feeding of the, where people take the body of Christ. Because it's connected, it's connected to the bread here.
Which is sort of a problem for us. We keep bread, consecrated bread in the almond.
Yeah.
And we always say, thank God we don't keep the fish.
So it's, yeah, so the enactment of the Eucharist, as much as it's an enactment of Passover to some extent, it really is a reenactment of this miracle, which is such an important miracle, where again, people continue to be fed by Christ. Yeah, exactly. This is what, to some extent, why it comes back every day, every time it's performed, every time the ritual is performed, it's literally getting back to this miracle of sharing this to the people, with the people.
Get the wafer though, right?
Sorry? It's a choice, right? What'd you say?
The wafer, what is it called?
I think they all have some version.
Oh, they do. Okay.
Some people don't do it as a part of a daily mass, and some people don't have Eucharist every Sunday,
For every day.
right? So some churches don't perform that every week. How often do they do it? Pretty much every week, right? At Anglican,
They do it.
because Anglican churches are that connected to the Catholic Church in that way. I mean, it really does. But if you go to a Baptist church, or if you go to a lot of Protestant churches,
Sure looks like a little piece.
I'm thinking right now, the Methodist churches I go, they don't ever
All
do it.
Methodists do.
They don't do it every week though.
It depends on the Methodist church. There's sort of high church Methodists. Otherwise, they might do it quarterly.
Yeah.
Tim seems to remember that the Presbyterians did it every Sunday.
Some Presbyterians.
I think they used to. They cut back a little
What
bit.
about the
No,
North?
okay. They don't have this kind of thing, but they do have a version of it. Uh-huh.
Do they?
Oh, yeah. They have a version of it, I said. It's different, very different.
Of course it is.
But yeah, this miracle becomes central to some extent to Christianity. As I said, it's in all four gospels, so it's very important.
Today's a feast day, for example. Today is All Saints.
Yeah,
That's right.
Most Anglican churches would have a service today.
I thought it was Taco Tuesday.
Dia de los Muerta. Dia de los Muerta. It's Dia de los, it's tomorrow, right? Yeah. So All Hallows Eve, and then All Saints Day, and then All Souls Day.
Oh,
It's not one day. You only know about the Halloween stuff. Yeah. Anyways, so this is a miracle that affects a lot of people. in Jesus's day, it affects even more people.
Can I ask a question
Yeah.
about Josephus?
Yes.
I know I talked about,
What?
I asked you before. Was he alive in Jesus' time?
He was alive. He was born,
Right around
he was
that-
born around the time that Jesus was crucified,
That's what I thought.
but he was living in the immediate days right after. So you're talking about, he knew people who would have
Right.
lived at that time. The interesting thing is that he only mentions Jesus once, and we're not clear that he actually mentioned Jesus. He goes on and on about John the Baptist. I will just show you, just very briefly, how big the John the Baptist execution is in Josephus.
Those who say that they really had to build up John the Baptist in order to knock him down.
Perhaps,
Not to ignore him would be to set him aside and apart, so. to
yes.
lift him up and
So what they did is, to some extent, the theory is that, and again, this is only based on the fact of what we know about Josephus and about what he did. Here's the story of here's Josephus's version of this, which is much more detailed. Christian Bible's not concerned with the background of these guys. They don't care.
Consider John the Baptist an Essene.
You can definitely consider him something like, yes, he describes him as an Essene. But here's what he says about what's going on here. By the way, it mentions Petra right there. Because King Aretas of Petra, he's a Nabatean king of the people that lived in Petra. He had a quarrel with Herod Antipas, right? And it says that Herod, the other Herod, actually, no, this is still Herod Antipas, married Aretas's daughter and lived with her a long time. But he went to Rome. He lived with Herod, who was his brother indeed, which is basically saying his half brother, right? They had the same dad, but not the same mom. So Herod Philip and Herod Antipas are brothers, and he fell in love with Herodias, Herod Philip, his brother's wife. Now, it's, as I said, we don't get exactly these details in the Christian story, but you get enough. I mean, you get enough of it.
Was Herod a title or was Herod?
Herod was his name, but these other guys,
It's like, George Foreman named all his.
yes, but it's basically saying, hey, this is Herod and these are the Herod versions of them. They had two names, right? So yes, this is the story we just read, but this is the Josephus version. So let me just get to this. Let me get a little further. Now, some of the Jews who sought the destruction of Herod's army came from God. So essentially, I skipped over some of this. So Herod goes into battle against Aretas, and he loses. They lose the battle. And some of the Jews thought the destruction came from God as punishment for what Herod had done to John. So they say that some of the Jews, some of our people, thought that Herod got punished for what he had done to John. What had happened with John? It's according to Josephus, Herod had killed this good man who had commanded the Jews to exercise virtue, righteousness towards one another, and piety towards God. Seems like a pretty standard prophet, teacher, whatever you want to say. And he baptized people. So he's known as John the Baptist because he baptized people. And he did it so that they would be cleansed. Their souls were clean, but that their bodies would be clean too. It's interesting. This idea of baptism was important to him. That's why we call him John the Baptist. According to Josephus, it was pretty important. Now, many people came in crowds to him, for they were greatly moved by his words. Herod, who feared the great influence John had over the masses, might put them into his power and enable them to raise a rebellion, thought it best to put him to death. Accordingly, John was sent as prisoner out of Herod's suspicious temper to Machaerus in this castle, and he was put to death. Now, nowhere does it say here anything about Salome dancing and telling her uncle to kill the guy, but it does give us a little bit of a sense that there was something going on between Herod Philip and Herodias. So Salome's mom. So it doesn't get into the details of the dance and to the, you know, to that level, but it basically says in this version, which I think makes a little bit more sense, that according to Josephus, John the Baptist was too powerful, and Herod wanted him dead. Now, the Christian Bible seems to be saying he wanted him dead, but he was afraid of him, and he didn't want to kill him, and so he was seduced and he gave into it. But regardless, he's responsible for killing a really good guy that was very popular with lots of people. Anyways, I'm just going to tell you, this is a critical part of Christian Bible. It's a critical part of, probably a critical part of Jewish history at the time, giving us a little indication of why Herod's sons were so really ineffective and powerless. And of course, it doesn't matter to the Romans because they feed off of that. They feed off of that dissension, and they feed off of their inability to rule the people effectively. So this is all going on when Jesus is coming to power. This is all coming to power, coming into his role, whatever you want to call it. Why were the Herod kings, and they're mentioned in the Christian Bible, Herod Philip, Herod Antipas are mentioned in the Christian Bible. Why can Jesus scare them? Because they're not very powerful and they hate each other. They don't trust each other. The Romans pit them against each other. Look, Herod created the situation. Why? Because he divided up his kingdom, his small, tiny kingdom of Israel, of Judea. He cut it up into 4 pieces, and he gave each of his sons a different piece. Rather than have one king, he gave them all a piece, and they all fought against each other, and they all had a smaller realm, and it was very bad. And Jesus was alive during that period. That was Jesus's period. And it almost directly led to the civil war. The destruction of the temple in Jerusalem was a result of this stupid stuff that was happening. Why do we know it? Because Josephus, he's the historian who recounted it all. All right, I don't want to get too far off field, but I did want to show you that this is, well, to some extent, you can make the argument that whatever the Christian Bible tells us about these days of Jesus's time, if people believe that it's replaying these stories from the Book of Kings, then the stories are pretty important because it fuels the speculation that we're living in the time of the Messiah. So it is important. That's why I shared it, but I want you to know that people do care about this. They care about this stuff.
So the Messiah being our Messiah.
Any Messiah, a Messiah. People want the Messiah. So let us read about another thing that Jesus does a lot. I'm not going to show you all the stories because there's quite a few, and different versions of them in the Gospels. Leprosy, but it's not really leprosy necessarily in this story, because the Bible uses a word for leprosy we call tza'arat, which is, we know about it in Leviticus. I'm pointing to Mike because he's read a lot of times with us the discussions of tza'arat in the Torah portions, Tazria and Matzorah and Leviticus. It is not in the time of Naaman that we're about to read, in the time of Elisha and Elijah. It is not true leprosy. How do we know that? Because they did not have leprosy in the country of Israel at this time. It came, they will get it. Just so you know, by the time of Jesus, they have, no, but they do have, but leprosy just had, that disease hadn't spread yet. In the ancient world, diseases took longer to spread than they do today. They did not fly around like we do. So this is not Hansen's disease we're about to read. By the time of Jesus, it might have been. And that is actually seriously important because we have a word for a skin disease or skin diseases in the Bible that seem to include a whole lot of things, including diseases that can be cured. By Jesus' time, when they use the same words, they might mean leprosy, which there is no cure for. So if you see, and we saw the story in the Talmud about the Messiah binding the wounds of the lepers. If this is true leprosy, there is no cure for it. So curing somebody from leprosy is literally like bringing them back from the dead. In the time of the Bible, the Torah, the Old Testament, whatever you want to call it, leprosy might have been, or the skin disease they're talking about, tzara'at, could have been cured. So this is not, there is a difference, and it is significant, because during the time of Jesus, they're actually talking about the leprosy that there is no cure for. And so if you're cured of it, it is a full-fledged 100% miracle of supernatural importance. The skin diseases that get cured here are important, but they're scary. They're not necessarily ones where your skin falls off, your limbs fall off, and it doesn't ever come back. Yeah, and you're not, but that's because maybe you can be cured.
Right.
Okay, so here's what happens in the story. This is the story from chapter 5. If you'd read, Rosemary.
Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram, was important to his lord and high in his favor, for through him the Lord had granted victory to Aram. But the man, though a great warrior, was a leper.
And let's even look at the note here. See, the note says, go back to Leviticus chapter 13, verse 3, which is tzara'at, mitzorah. He has this skin disease. And they're going to use the word leprosy because it's what people have used for a long time, but it's not a good translation. But it's much easier than saying skin disease.
Dolphin skin.
Correct. But if you're going to use the word, all right. So, but we know about Naaman. He's the commander of the armies of Syria, of Aram. He's important. He's a great warrior. And he's giving victories to Aram. He's literally helping them win wars, including wars against us. So here we go.
Once, when the Arameans were out raiding, they carried off a young girl from the land of Israel, and she became an attendant to Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, I wish master could come before the prophet in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy.
Wow. So Naaman has an Israelite slave in his house, right? She's taking care of his wife. And she says to the wife, I wish Naaman could go get some help from our prophet in Israel. Now, it hasn't named him as Elisha, but it is going to see it's Elisha. So she says, I know this guy could cure him. If he could only go there. So this is an enemy of ours. Aram is, again, in modern day Syria. It is where Damascus is, right? It's not very far. It's about 40, 45, 50 miles from the border from Tiberias. It's not far, but it's a different kingdom, and it goes up and down. We saw sometimes they're subservient to Judah, but at this point they're not, and at this point they're on the rise again.
Naaman went and told his lord just what the girl from the land of Israel had said. And the king of Aram said, Go to the king of Israel, and I will send along a letter. He set out, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing.
No, that's a lot. It's a lot of money. A lot of money. We're talking about the equivalent of millions of dollars, actually, in today's money. So the king of Aram basically says to the king of Israel, basically says to Naaman, go to Israel with this money, and I'll pay for your cure. I'll pay for your healing. That's a lot of money. It's definitely enough to almost say this is like tribute, it is. It's a level of tribute. And so,
What does that mean, a level of tribute?
like, this is, we're paying you off to go away, and again, at this time, Aram is more powerful than Israel. So it's almost like they're saying, hey, you know what, we're showing our kind of respect for you, and we're placing ourselves at your disposal, right?
Don't hurt us.
Yeah. So here's what happens.
He brought the letter to the king of Israel. It read, Now, when this letter reaches you, know that I have sent my courtier Naaman to you, that you may cure him of his leprosy. When the king of Israel read the letter, he rent his clothes and cried, "Am I God to deal death or give life, that this fellow writes to me to cure a man of leprosy? Just see for yourselves that he is seeking a pretext against me."
So this is again King Yoram of Israel, who is Ahab's son. He's his brother, if you recall, had died. Ahaziah died, and he's taken over. And he seems like he's a pretty good king in the sense that he respects the God of Israel. He respects Elisha. He's doing like some things right, but he's again, we heard that he's not good because he's still not sending people to Jerusalem for their sacrifices. But other than that, seems like a pretty good guy. But there's a problem here, which is he's scared to death because the Naaman just showed up at his door with all this stuff and basically says, "Cure me." And he's like, well, we can't cure him. What are we going to do? He's going to attack us now because we can't fix him. He's setting us up. This is what he says. We're being set up. This is a game he's playing with us. This is a pretext for him to attack us. So we're going to die because of this thing. And he's scared. He's scared.
When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had rent his clothes, he sent a message to the king. "Why have you rent your clothes? Let him come to me, and he will learn that there is a prophet in Israel."
So Elisha sends the king a note. Basically, again, he hears about it. Why does he hear about it? Because he's the prophet. He could have had somebody on the inside telling him what's going on too, but whatever. He knows he's a prophet. He tells the king, "Don't worry about it. I'll fix it." And he's going to learn that there's, that God's on our side.
He talks about the rent your clothes, but not about the money.
Well, renting his clothes means he tears his clothes.
Oh, the tearing.
Yeah, he tore his clothes because he thought he was dead.
Oh, God.
He tore his clothes because he thinks he's dead.
Okay.
He's tearing his clothes for himself and for the kingdom, for everything. He's going to lose
He didn't
everything.
say to bring his clothes and his money.
Oh, no, he got all these clothes. He got 10 pairs of clothes, which is an amazing wardrobe. No. No, this isn't about renting clothes. This is about tearing clothes. He tore his clothes, right? He thinks he's dead. So Elisha says, "Send him to me."
So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and halted at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to say to him, "Go and bathe 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean."
Wow. So guy shows up at Elisha's house, and Elisha doesn't come out. Elisha doesn't come out. Instead, he sends a message out: "Go bathe in the Jordan 7 times, come back, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. You'll be good."
We need that cancer cure.
That's what he's going to do. So it's a miracle, right? I'm telling you, this is going to be a miracle. Okay, but let's see what Naaman says to this miracle.
But Naaman was angered and walked away. "I thought," he said, "he would surely come out to me and would stand and invoke the Lord his God by name and would wave his hand toward the spot and cure the affected part. Are not the Amanah and the Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? I could bathe in them and be clean." And he stopped off in a rage.
It's a great scene. It's a great scene. It's a great scene because he wants the guy to do some magic. I want some performance here. The guy doesn't even come out. He tells me what to do. He says, "I got rivers in Syria I can go bathe in. They're much better, actually. They're even better than the Jordan. Go there. I came all the way out here, and the guy's not even coming out of his house. He's not even doing anything. I want some magic. I want a show." He goes, he don't believe it. He thinks he's being dismissed. He doesn't think they're taking him seriously. So he's mad. He's like, "I came all this way, and this is what you're going to give me?" Like, there's nothing even like there doesn't seem like they're not taking it seriously. Literally, they're playing with me. So
But his servants came forward and spoke to him. Sir, they said, if the prophet told you to do something difficult, would you not do it? How much more when he's only said to you, bathe and be clean?
Yeah, so his assistant saying, look, if he told you to do something hard, you do it. He's telling you to do something easy, you do it. Just try it. Might as well try it. So it's very easy to do. And so he says, just go do it.
So he went down and immersed himself in the Jordan 7 times as the man of God had bidden. And his flesh became like a little boy's, and he was clean.
There you go.
And they live happily
So, well, wait, no, it's going to get better. So he does it and it works. Now, we're going to get to that. You'll see what he does. But what's great about this scene is it's so real. Like, when people talk about the Torah and about, some people go, did this really happen? Did the guy really get cured? Look, I don't know, but I will tell you this. There's a truth to this story that's really powerful, which is that the way we work as human beings, we expect when we're going to have a miracle that it's going to be really, really noticeable. I want a miracle that I'm going to, I want
a miracle I can post on Facebook.
exactly. I want everybody to see it. We better have some pictures of this. And I want to be lit up while it's happening. And I want some guy with a scary prophet look to him, waving stuff at me and babbling stuff in some language I don't know. This is not what I expected. I did not expect to go just jump in the water and come out okay. But in reality, of course, think about how much more miraculous this is. And what happens?
Returning with his entire retinue to the man of God, he stood before him and exclaimed, now I know that there is no God in the whole world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant.
So he's cured and he converts. And I mean converts, because now he says, there is no God in the world except for Israel. Now, this is a pretty important, because aside from the conversion of Abraham, who doesn't really have a moment of converting, God speaks to him and he listens and the whole thing starts. This is the first convert to Judaism that we read about. Now, we read about Ruth, right? We read about Ruth, who becomes part of the Jewish people. That's happened a couple generations before, right? And in a way, she's the first convert who joins the Jewish people out of, you could say she didn't have to, right? But some people would point out that she's part of the Jewish people by marriage, right? And so she takes on Judaism because she is part of the people. Your people will be my people, your God will be my God. Now that's a pretty powerful thing. It's one of the greatest lines arguably in the entire Bible. Nobody really talks about Naaman. You've never probably heard of Naaman. He's not very well known. Ruth is pretty well known. We have a whole holiday of Shavuot where we read her story and talk about Ruth, and we've got a lot of women running around named Ruth. She's a great hero for the Jewish people, and deservedly so. But Naaman is not known. And what's interesting about Naaman is you can make the argument, look, God did something for him. He has a reason to start feeling this way. But what's interesting about Naaman is that he doesn't become part of the Jewish people. He just becomes a Jew. Now, this is tough. This is tough because he's going back to Syria. He's going back to his job, which is to defeat us in war if needed be. He's going back to the other side. And he's not going to be in Jerusalem or in Israel or anywhere else where he can worship God. So how does a person who has no connection to the Jewish people through family, who has no connection to the Jewish people through their environment for the way that they could be, but how does someone who now is living amongst a whole nother group of people, how is that person going to maintain their Judaism? So this is a very interesting story.
So this must play into.
Isaac Bashever's sinner,
Yes,
slave.
yes.
Did they become circumcised?
What were you going to say about the slave?
Well, that is a Jew who's captured, I think, by Poles.
Yep,
And how does he stay
Jewish.
Jewish in this?
Yes.
Torah environment?
So there is a big question about what
And
happened
only
when
because
Jews
he's
were.
leaving, right?
Well, that's actually more, I would say, more of a version of Daniel, but it is one of how do you stay Jewish, if you will. But what's interesting about this story is that this is a guy who is not Judean, he's not Israelite, he's not genetically or connected through family, he's not connected through marriage, and he's not even going to be living in Israel. So this is an interesting model of Judaism, which at least gives us the ability to wrap our heads around the fact that maybe people at some point, Naaman maybe being the first one, identify with Jewish theology, if you will, but there is really no sense of Jewish nationality or peoplehood to this.
So, correct me if I'm wrong. Jesus was a Jew.
Yeah.
So does this tie in somewhere?
Well, I will tell you, it ties into this, which is how did people who originally became part of Jesus's disciples or inner circle who did not have Jewish identity? And then this becomes a problem to some extent for people who are not going to be living amongst the community. Now, in the Gospels and in the early part of the church, yeah, this is a problem. It's a great question, Marcia.
Jesus is a prophet until he hangs on the cross,
Well, that's it.
and then he becomes the Messiah. He becomes his role changes again, right?
Well, we're not done with this story, but I want to just tell you that's a little bit of that is a little bit difficult a question, but I will tell you,
And Jesus comes in somewhere soon, right?
800 years later from this. Yeah. So there is a version of this, though, since you brought it up, Marcia, which I will share, which is not in the Gospels, but it's in the Acts. And it's a story of a eunuch who was an Ethiopian, right? So this is a guy who's from Ethiopia, and he's a court official. Yeah.
This reminds me of today with Uganda and Rabbi Burton.
Well, there's always that question of whether people can become Jewish without having that connection. So here in this story, Philip, one of the disciples, gets literally magically, supernaturally taken to be in front of this court official of Candace, the queen of the Ethiopians, who was very important. Philip goes over to the chariot where this eunuch is, and he's reading the Bible. He's reading from Isaiah, and he says, "Do you understand what you're reading?" "How can I unless someone guides me?" And he invited Philip up, and he teaches them, and he teaches them scripture. And the eunuch said to Philip, Philip opened his mouth and he told them the good news about Jesus. And they were going along the way, and they came to some water. And the eunuch said, "See, here's water. What prevents me from being baptized?" And he commanded the chariot, and they baptized him. And they came out of the water, and the eunuch saw him no more. So here's a story about a guy who converts to Christianity, who's not Jewish, he's not Israelite, he's Ethiopian, and he also goes into the water. You see the parallels in this story. So Marcia, you brought up an interesting case of what happens to Christians who are following the tradition, but who are not going to be around Jews, who are not going to be around the community. So there is a version of this story in the Christian Bible, which also parallels to some extent what happens here, which is what do I do? In this case, the guy's trying to understand Christianity. He's trying to understand the Bible through, to some extent, well, there's a real question of is he trying at that moment to understand it through a Christian eyes, or does Philip come around and actually teach him how to read it through Christian eyes? But the point is he's actually, of course, he's reading the Hebrew Bible. He's reading the book of Isaiah because there is no Christian Bible yet. So, he comes along and explains to him stuff. So, what's Naaman going to do? How is he going to stay Jewish? So here's a really interesting question. How does Naaman become, so again, I brought that up, Marsha. I wasn't planning on sharing you that story. It's one of my favorite stories in the Christian Bible about how they spread Christianity to people who aren't going to be living in Israel. How they're not going to be living with the community. Can they still be followers? And so they can be through teaching. Okay. I mean, the point of that story to some extent in the Christian Bible is you got to have a teacher, right? You got to have somebody explain you the text, right? You have to be able to, you have to have that. But he still goes away.
The first council though was, in order to be a Christian, you have to be circumcised.
Yeah.
Oh, that was really?
Yeah. So those kinds of differentiations in Christianity were important. But what's Naaman going to do? Because it's a good question. Does Naaman get circumcised? I don't know, but it doesn't say. But what Naaman doesn't want to do is he wants to give something to Elisha. He wants to give something to these guys, right? And so, he has this religious conviction, this conversion, this epiphany, if you will. And he says, I got to give you something. But here's what Elisha says.
But he replied, as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept anything. He pressed him to accept, but he refused.
So you
And
can see-
Naaman said,
Keep going.
then at least let your servant be given 2 mule loads of earth, for your servant will never again offer up burnt offering or sacrifice to any god except the Lord.
What does that mean?
Well,
I don't understand that. What is the earth?
Okay, so we'll explain that first before we move on to the rest of this idea. So Elisha says, no, I'm not going to take any money because this was God that did it. It wasn't me. I didn't do a miracle for you. God did it, and you can't pay God. And Naaman says, well, wait a second. Let me be given at least some bags of earth, because I don't want to do anything where I'm not, at least where I'm praying, where I'm not praying to God. And he says he's basically saying, by having the earth, I'll be able to pray in the land of Israel when I'm offering up my offerings. So I'm going to take this earth, I'm going to set it up in my house, and I'm going to make a temple to God in my house, in my property for God, because I can't offer up anything anymore unless I'm offering it up to God. And he thinks by having the dirt that he's going to literally be able to do it. But wait, there's more. There's more to this story, but here's what he says.
So let me ask you one more
Yeah.
question. Does that earth become the ritual of burial in Jewish law about being buried in the soil?
No, but it is, but it is kind of connected to the idea of wanting to have
The
earth with you, to have that earth of Israel on your
I mean, that would be
coffin.
my dream burial would be to be
Buried in Israel, yeah. So having the earth with you is definitely part of it, and we do put some earth from Israel on people's coffins to this day, right? We pour a little dirt, right? So there is a connection, but this is really for him in life to never have to never be able to ever have to make an offering unless he's offering it in Israel. But he says there's something I got to do. Here's what I got to do.
But may the Lord pardon your servant for this. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow low in worship there, and he is leaning on my arms so that I must bow low in the temple of Rimmon. When I bow low in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord pardon your servant in this.
Wow. So he's very serious about it. He says, when I go back to my country and I'm with my king and we're worshiping in the temple of Rimmon, which is where the Arameans worship their god. He says, I have to go in there with my king and I'm going to bow with him, but I don't want to. I'm not doing it because I want to. I have to do it. And he says, even though I'm bowing, I'm really going through the motions. I'm not doing it because I believe in the gods of Syria. Hadad. I don't believe in Hadad. I don't believe in those gods. But just understand that I have to do that for my job, right? It's for my job. I have to go through this act.
As the Jews had to do during the Holocaust.
During the Spanish Inquisition, right? And here's what he says.
And he said to him, go in peace. When he had gone some distance from
Oh, wait,
him,
so let's just finish with that line, just because he leaves Elisha's area, right? He leaves Elisha's home, that area where he was with Elisha. And Elisha seems to be okay with that compromise. He says, go in peace. He says to him, lech shalom, go in peace. So that is a Naaman basically leaving Elisha and saying, I want to worship God. I have to go through these rituals, but I'm really a Jew at heart. It's a pretty powerful idea. Very, very, again, it's an amazing story. It's one that I think is one of the stories that people don't know about, but it's a really important story.
People today have these situations, right? There are some, the Monheims moved to Idaho and there's just zero community around them. I mean, go in peace, right?
Right.
I mean, it's Chico, right? I mean, you're
It's-
used to your community, right?
It's true.
I mean, we experienced that in Washington. We're used to our community.
Yeah.
I found a community, but that is important.
Yeah. No, it is true. And so he has to go away. But wait, the story's not over,
Okay.
because there's a wonderful postscript to the story. Well, it's not wonderful, it's horrible, but it's a wonderful lesson. A wonderful lesson.
Gehazi, the attendant of Elisha, the man of God, thought, my master has let that Aramean Naaman off without accepting what he brought. As the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him.
So here's Gehazi at work. And we've already seen that Gehazi, there might be something off with this guy, but now we know for sure. Because he's very mad that his boss just let that money go. Now, again, and when people talk about whether this really happened, let's sit for 1 second and say the truth of this story is very powerful. At every level, what people do emotionally, the psychological movement in this story, Naaman basically saying, look, I gotta go through the motions. Naaman not thinking that this miracle is going to happen because there's no performance. All of these things are so real. And this scene, what Gehazi just pulled, is the ultimate greed that happens when people know that they have the opportunity and it went through their fingers. He's sitting there while his boss was going, no, we're not taking any money. And he's going, you got to be kidding me. This guy just walked through here. He's so wealthy. We can get anything we want. There's a famine going on. It's still in the background. Are you crazy? This guy, our big shot just walked out the door. And he says, this isn't going to happen. I'm not going to let this happen.
He never tells us to Naaman.
We're not. Well, let's see what happens. He says, no. Oh, Judith just walked in. Judith just walked in for the kicker of this story. She was in the car. She was in the car the whole time, but now she's here. All right, here she is. So, Gehazi, I want something.
So Gehazi hurried after Naaman. When Naaman saw someone running after him, he alighted from his chariot to meet him and said, is all well?
Oh, so Gehazi goes after Naaman. Naaman sees him. He gets out of the chariot and he goes, shalom. That's what he says. He says, shalom. Shalom to you. Now, by the way, Naaman might have said shalom because that's what they said in Aram. They spoke very similar word to Hebrew. So he says, ha shalom. Is it good, right? Is everything cool? Is everything cool? And what does he say back to him?
All is well.
He says, shalom. Vayamor shalom adoni. He says, actually, yeah.
My master has sent me to say, 2 youths, disciples of the prophets, have just come to me from the hill country of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 changes of clothing.
Wow. So Gehazi has a wonderful lie, right? It's a wonderful lie and a very believable lie, right? Because if you're going to tell a lie, make it believable. You really got to make it believe. You got to sell it, right? You can't just say, oh, my master changed his mind. Go give him, we want some money. Says, no, what, literally the guys just walked in and said they need some money. And so I ran after you to see if we could still get that money you offered us. They just came. They just came into town. They were visiting and they just got here, right? So it's not like they were there. They just got here. All of it seems very believable, right? This is very believable. And the amount of money that he's asking for is very believable too. He doesn't,
Not
he's
asking for the whole thing.
not crazy. And he asks for 2 changes of clothing, which makes sense because there's 2 guys. He's not asking for 2 things for 1 guy. He's asking for a talent of silver, which is, again, it's money, but it's nothing compared to what he came with, right?
Naaman said, please take 2 talents. He urged him, and he wrapped the 2 talents of silver in 2 bags and gave them, along with 2 changes of clothes, to 2 of his servants who carried them ahead of him.
Okay, so he actually says take 2 talents because, talent is really not that, was for what
Now
he
they
had.
They'll get a talent each this way.
Yeah, so he's basically, he's given him a even more than he asked because he didn't ask, he wasn't super greedy. He was greedy, but he was with, and again, everything that happens, everything in the story is so truthful because this is exactly the way people would really pull it off. Yep.
When Gehazi arrived at the citadel, he took the things from them and deposited them in the house. Then he dismissed the men and they went their way. He entered and stood before his master, and Elisha said to him, where have you been, Gehazi? He replied, your servant is not gone anywhere.
So Elisha confronts him when he gets back and says to him, where have you been, Gehazi? And he lied. He lied. Well, he's a prophet, right? What's he
Got
doing?
the nerve to
He's
lie
trying
to a prophet.
he's not a good person to lie to. Your boss, you can lie to your boss, but if your boss is a prophet, he's gonna know. So he's not very good. It's not a very good situation for him. He probably already knows, he's got to know, it's not looking good for him because the guy says right away to him, where were you? And he lied. He says, I haven't gone anywhere. He could have lied and said, but I think he knows. I think he knows he's caught, but what happens?
Then Elisha said to him, did not my spirit go along when a man got down from his chariot to meet you? Is this a time to take money in order to buy clothing and olive groves and vineyards, sheep and oxen and male and female slaves?
Yeah, so he says, I know where you are. He says, did not my spirit go along when a man got down? So and again, the word here is lowly be halech. They translate it as spirit, but what does your translation have? Not much. It's 26.
It says the same thing.
So do not my spirit? Interesting. So they translate libi, which literally means my heart. My heart. Which also, again, in the Bible means more than heart. It's like your mind too. It's like, I know what happens. I know what happened when that guy got off of his chariot to meet you. So he knew what was going on. He knew in his heart. He knew in his mind because they share that mind now. He goes, I know what happened. I can see it. And I know what you're thinking too. Because he actually tells them what you were thinking of doing with that money. So you saw this as an opportunity. He comes back and hides the money. And he goes, I know what you were going to do. I know what you were going to do with that money. So here's what he says.
Surely the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and to your descendants forever. And as Gehazi left his presence, he was snow white with leprosy.
So this is one of the biggest stories of leprosy, of not leprosy, but of the skin disease that they had, Sa'arat. And the Sa'arat is a punishment that according to this is intergenerational.
I was just gonna say, I was born with eczema, so do I blame him?
You're a descendant of Gehazi. The Gehazi's sin is so bad that it sticks to the generations that come after him. So this is an interesting thing because, Gehazi becomes to some extent, again, a model of what not to do. And what is so interesting about this is that it reminds us of the responsibilities that people have when they speak and do stuff on behalf of God, what the consequences are. Because the guy misappropriated or tried to make money off of God, and you can see what the punishment is. And it is a serious issue because you're destroying somebody's faith. And we really don't know what happens to Naaman. He doesn't give the money back to Naaman. Naaman doesn't get the money back. Naaman had an opportunity to go away feeling like, hey, the Israelites they're very holy people, and this is a different kind of faith that I now a part of. And now he just put a price tag on it. Now, he did it in a way that, again, you can make the argument, he feels like he's helping out. Gehazi at least allows him to make it seem like it's not just, it's charity. It's not like Elisha just decided he wanted to make a few bucks, but it's still a terrible thing that happened in that, he lied. He was misappropriating funds. He stole basically in the name of Elisha. And he is, again, you can make the argument that this is a punishment that's pretty harsh, but Gehazi is meant to be a role model for us of what not to do when it comes to religion and working in the name of God. And, look, there is a horrible, burden that comes with, making money off of God. And again, it goes to like every level of what people do.
He's still under God's protection.
Who, Elisha, Gehazi, or what do you mean by that?
Well, I don't know how else to say it. He's still under God's rule, under God.
Gehazi, yeah.
So no matter what he did, he's still accountable too.
Well, it's not only that, he doesn't stop. He doesn't die. He's not punished with death. I mean, he's punished with this. And it says he leaves Elisha's presence. What happens to Gehazi after? I mean, this is where, midrashically we're kind of left with the descendants of Gehazi, are they perpetrating this type of thing? But look, this is the problem where, when money and religion get intertwined, what happens to people when they have this kind of money, when they have this kind of access to money, especially if they're doing it in the name of God, whether it's Jim and Tammy Baker or whoever it is. When people feel that money that they gave to God is being misappropriated, it affects their faith. So to me, this is a great lesson in what not to do when it comes to living with, living off of God to some extent.
Another one, for a while, Jews might have felt that if they give money, more modern times, give money to the temple, they'd have more protection or more,
A bribe to
would
God.
give them more health or wealth or whatever.
Well, yes, other than the fact that, I think people always have that feeling that somehow if they, can buy God off, that somehow they're going to have good things happen. This story actually puts that on, turns that on its ear, because Naaman doesn't have to pay anything to get God's help, right? And so if he does, then, well, how much money do I have to give in order to get God's help? So, that's one of the things that Gehazi potentially did by destroying that. There is no quid pro quo. And so this was the this was what Gehazi that was so bad, was that, he then puts a price tag on to some extent. Does Gehazi now think, oh, well, yeah, there is always a catch, right? I always have to pay something. And so that this is, this is part of the problem.
What do you think this curse means ultimately?
On Gehazi?
Well, on his family, his descendants forever.
You better remember this.
I mean, I can't quite picture what that means.
Well,
I understand the idea.
let's just see if there's any good commentary that I'll share with you. So let's see if there's any. I thought there was something from the Talmud. So Radak, Rabbi Kimchi says, basically says that the descendants of Gehazi didn't necessarily have to have it if they continued in his way, if they continued to do his sin. If his sons sinned like he did, then they would have it as well. So the tzara, the disease. So the rabbis don't like the rabbis don't like the idea that the tzara, the disease that he has, would be on every one of his kids if they didn't do anything bad. So it says it doesn't say all his children, all his descendants. So it says lo amar b'chol habani. It's not every one of his descendants. And by sons, it doesn't mean, his sons. It means his grandsons, great grandsons. It doesn't mean that everybody had it, but if any of them continued to be like that. So interestingly, there's this idea that if you behave a certain way, that this tzara'at would come on you. So if you're a descendant of Gehazi, and you don't know, maybe you are a descendant of Gehazi, that if you behave this way, you will get the tzara'at just like he did, which is a cautionary tale. So you're supposed to walk away going, man, maybe I am a descendant of Gehazi, and I could wind up with that same skin disease if I get it. So yeah, this becomes part of the legend of what happens with tzara'at. Look, it's not leprosy. So I mean, we keep using the word leprosy, but that's what it's a skin disease. I try to use the word skin disease. There is an understanding that the skin disease that we get, tzara'at or whatever the skin disease is, how the manifestations of it are, it's specifically a punishment for one sin that we commit in particular. Does anybody know what that sin is? Telling lies, talebearing, lying. And there's an idea that tzara'at affects us when we lie. So the scary thing is, if I lie, then I will get it, I will get this skin disease, is meant to scare us. So so the disease metzorah, right? In Hebrew, we say that there's a connection with the words motzei shem ra, which is to say bad things about somebody. Now, again, Naaman didn't necessarily say bad things about a person, but he did lie, and he did use his words to hurt people. He did lie. And so we are supposed to be careful of talking bad about people, because who's the first person who gets hit with this? Miriam, for talking bad about her brother. Miriam got hit with Metzorah in Numbers chapter 12 when she speaks badly about her brother. Interestingly, Aaron, who it says also was engaged in that, did not get hit with the same skin disease. I'll just show you real quick since we have the Torah open. And that is right here. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of a Cushite woman he had taken in his household. He took a Cushite woman. We're not really sure what they're talking about here. Was it a second wife? Is it Zipporah? Was she a Cushite Midianite? We don't really know. but they said, is Moses only, does God only speak through Moses? Is, is he the only one? Aren't we prophets? And they came out, Aaron and Miriam said, I speak to Moses in a different way. And as the cloud withdrew from the tent, there was Miriam stricken with snow white scales. So Miriam had the same thing happen to her. And of course, Aaron says to Moses, you've got to pray for her. Don't let her be like that. He says, you got to pray for our sister. And he says to God, El na rafana la. Please God heal her. Please God heal her. El na rafana la. And Adonai says to Moses, she's got to be outside the camp for 7 days. And she is healed. So that is the story of Tzarat, or Miriam, who also said bad things. She used her words for not good purposes. Yep. So, same words, snow white leprosy. So, folks, when we talk about using our words and not lying and not doing bad things with our words, lying, talebearing, slander, those kind of things, that's why we're worried about that. So that is our cautionary tale, if you will. All right. Let's read a little bit more, and we'll see one more little story of Elisha and his disciples and his friends. So here they are.
The disciples of the prophets said to Elisha, see, the place where we live under your direction is too cramped for us.
We don't have enough space, Elisha. We don't like the accommodations here that you're providing it in your camp, in your prophet's camp. We need some space, Elisha. All right.
Let us go to the Jordan, and let us each get a log there and build quarters there for ourselves to live in. Do so, he replied. Then one of them said, will you please come along with your servants? Yes, I will come, he said.
So it seems originally he's not coming. He's going, you can go do it. And then they said, but yeah, you got to come too.
I want to know where they're gonna find logs in the desert.
Well, it's not desert. I mean, it's not a forest, but it's not a.
Palm trees.
Uh-huh.
Yes, I will come, he said, and he accompanied them. So they went to the Jordan and cut timber. As one of them was felling a trunk, the iron axe head fell into the water, and he cried aloud, alas, master, it was a borrowed one.
Keep going. Keep going. Uh-huh.
Where did it fall? Asked the man of God. He showed him the spot, and he cut off a stick and threw it in, and he made the axe head float. Pick it up, he said. And so he reached out and took it.
Yeah, arguably one of the stranger miracles in the Bible, the axe head, the retrieval of an axe head.
It was borrowed.
Well, the borrowed axe head, that's true. Well, that's why the guy's freaking out. He goes,
It's
I
not
don't-
mine.
I didn't own it. I borrowed it. It was my neighbor's. It was my neighbor's axe. He borrowed it from the guy next door. One of his tools. It's a very odd story. Now, again, it's a miracle. The axe heads don't float. So he does a miracle. It's supernatural. I'd say it's at a low level. This is a fairly low level. Now, look, you can make the argument.
It's curious that it's even.
Correct, which is also the pot where there was death in the pot. Now, again, you could say, well, people could have died if they ate it, but it also could have been kind of, this really isn't good. We can't really eat this, which is also, look, the whole story is weird too, because just throw out the pot. I know it's a famine. I know it's a famine, and then this is an axe head. But like on the level of replacement value, the pot of food and the pot of whatever herbs and this axe head, this is not, yeah, right, it's white privilege. This is not the level of miracles that, yes, it's not a Red Sea. That's right. That's right, Judith. It's not a Red Sea. So these miracles are not on a major scale. And again, as Reverend Lynn said, why is this in the Bible? Like, why is this here? And so they're definitely, like, we get these details in these chapters in Kings about Elisha, which are very detailed. It's not the kind of stuff that we get about Elijah, which seems almost like a macro picture of Elijah. But these people who are walking around with Elisha are definitely giving some very specific details of what's happening. And we've almost gone over, before we were following the Kings, and all of a sudden now we're following Elisha and his band of people.
But maybe we're supposed to look for little miracles. It's not just the grand.
Yeah, and you could make the argument that, again, when people are looking for these miracles, or they were having these miracles happen, look, they understood them to be miracles. And so at the end of the day, if you're writing your own story about how miracles have happened to you, somebody else may pick it up and go, that's not a big deal, right? And you know that it was a big deal. You know that whatever happened to you really shouldn't have happened to you. And it was, it was a big miracle. It was a miracle for you in that moment. I mean, I've had things like that happen where I've told my kids about them, and I'm sometimes wondering, and I told my kids, like, I don't think they got it. Like, I don't think they realized, like, in that moment, it felt miraculous to me. And again, it could be, and again, some of the miracles I'm talking about, if I think about it today, I would also say, yeah, it's probably not that big of a deal. But at the moment that I'll just tell you, the quick version of the story is I was, I think it was my 19th or 20th birthday, my dad took me to Laughlin, Nevada, which again is not, it's not Vegas, it's Laughlin. But we went there, and I was in college, and I needed to pay for my housing, and I didn't know how I was going to pay for my housing. And I literally went and played a slot machine, which I wasn't even 21. I played a slot machine and I won $1,800, and I needed $1,760 to pay for my housing. And I actually I was with my dad, and I said to my dad, he was playing blackjack. I said, my dad wasn't a big gambler either. I went to my dad and I said, Dad, you got to come over. I just won a slot machine and I can't claim it. I'm not 21. He goes, get out of here. You're joking. I said, no, we have to go right now because someone could sit down. I left the slot machine. There's money spitting out of it. No one else is here. I mean, we didn't have any other family there. I said, you got to come over. And he got up, he got off the table, he came over, and sure enough, we had that money that literally went to pay for my housing for that semester. And I thought to myself at the time, I said, that's a little too weird, right? It was exactly that amount of money. And so I'll never forget it. At the time, it was just seemed eerie, but I've never had anything else like that ever happen exactly like that, but I'll never forget it. And I told my kids that story, and they're like, yeah, that's pretty cool, Dad. But I knew they never had to worry about their college housing, thankfully. So they never, somehow their dad and their mom miraculously always had the money for that. Never was, where's this money coming from? They never had that. So the miracle was, but I'm telling you, first of all, $1,700 back then was like $10,000. And the other thing is that I remember thinking to myself, like, why are we in Laughlin? Because we have to come up with this money, Dad. And I don't, I knew he thought some way we'd get, I'd get it, but I did not have it. So anyways, Was
it really 1,800 though? Because now I'm thinking
it was 18. No, I thought about it. I thought about it at the time, but I thought at the time that it was just more miraculous, that it was literally almost exactly the amount of money that I needed. So I think that that's what freaked me out. And Again, I don't know. I'll say it's a miracle, but I mean, it was at the time for me, it was a miracle. At the time, I know that having an axe head float to the surface of the water, I guess in that moment for that guy was a miracle. So
Well, I don't know. It sounds like it would make a good magic trick, and maybe that's what it was, not this time, but that it was a magic trick that people knew about, so it got attached to Elisha.
listen, it could be. I mean, I'm not saying that that's not the case because, there's always some performative thing
Right.
that he does with these little miracles. Other than the fact that the Naaman story almost again is like, no, you just went to the Jordan. Again, it is the Jordan, so it's not like it's any river, but there is a performative piece to this, which again, you could say is a magic trick. It's something where, somebody did something and it makes the thing happen because he cuts off a stick and makes it
Right,
happen.
that's what makes it sound like a magic trick.
It's not just that he, said,
It didn't just say, okay, axe
let
come,
axe come up, or he
let the
looked,
axe come up.
but he did it.
But could it also been, I mean, I think about stories and it's in a lot of novels and whatever, that they want somebody to be beatified, and so they find miracles. Right? And so it's almost like there's some PR going on here, that they're like, we want Elisha to have a good name. We want him to be in the Bible. We want him to be remembered. We gotta find some miracles. Like,
Yeah, but in all fairness, I mean, his miracles pop up. There's many more miracles that Elisha does than Elijah. The difference is that Elijah's are on a much bigger scale for the most part, not always. I mean, the Jordan River thing was only for Elisha and Elijah, but the scale of it is huge. I mean, causing the Jordan River to part is much bigger than making an axe head come up out of the water. But it doesn't affect that many people. But the power of it is huge. So bringing a child back to life, they both did it. But Elisha performs a lot more little miracles that we read about, and so we're definitely in that world with him. We're walking with the prophet for the last couple of chapters. We weren't with the kings. We were following the prophets and what they're doing during this time. Occasionally the stories will merge. What? Yeah. So that's another one of those little miracles. Well, that's what people want.
It's visual, it's not just, oh, look, I opened this package and there's my $1,700. I waved the wand and it's more, it's memorable, it's paint for better picture.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're actually going to stop here because the next part of the story is one of those stories that is miraculous. It is, but it is a longer story. And rather than get into the story, which goes through chapter 6 and chapter 7, is a story which brings the kings together. It brings the king together with Elisha, and it brings the Arameans together with Elisha. And so it's an interesting story because it brings the other stories together to some extent. And all we saw so far in this today was the king pop up for one moment when he's scared that Naaman is going to, use this as a pretext to go to war with us. So all the stories kind of back up. We'll get into this story. So the next story that we're going to read is an interesting one because we actually read it as a haftarah. We actually read it as a haftarah for Metzorah. So we read the story that we're about to read because it has Elisha, a prophet. It has the king of Syria. It has the king of Israel. It actually has the king of Judah. And it also has leprosy. It's got everything. It's got a little bit of everything. It's got all the themes that we've been reading about, and it really is the peak story of Elisha. So the next week we're gonna read about Elisha and his final confrontations, if you will, with the kings. And it seems like Elisha doesn't hate King Joram. And again, it doesn't even seem like, anybody really hates him, but there's a problem with him, which is that his mother is Jezebel.
We're back to her again.
And Ahab, his father, was not very good. But Jezebel, as Marcia asked about, when is Jezebel coming back? She will be back for her final act. Her final act next week. Jezebel will be back in her final act. You're not? Well, you come online and read about. You'll be with us when you read. You asked, and it'll be delivered to you. Anyways, everybody, we want to wish you a great rest of the week. What else do we want to tell people? Have a great rest of the week. What? All Saints Day. Happy All Saints Day. Happy happy day of souls, All Souls Day. What do you say for All Souls? Have a good soul day. Have a soulful day. May the- Souls. You have a soulful day. Have a soulful day. Yes.
Well, just that they were isolated, and so.
No. So leprosy. Oh, so to answer your question about leprosy did not come to the land of Israel until Alexander the Great's armies came with lots of people and lots of. So it's about 500 years after this. 300 years before Jesus, 500 years after this. So about halfway almost between this period, you actually get real, honest to goodness, battle of leprosy. Yes, leprosy we were able to cure because we let it run its course. Essentially, we isolated it. It is not completely gone. Well, I should say it's not completely gone because there's parts of the world where people have not been able to. There are treatments for it though. Yeah, there are treatments for leprosy. No, there are ways of stopping the spread of it on a person using. No, they use these electrical stimulants on people's. Anyways, it's a scary disease. It's very scary. So we will pick it up the next week in the story of how people who are leprous or not leprous, but they have the skin disease that get to be the heroes of the story. Because there's a great story that we're going to read about how these guys.
That's your teaser.
So we cooked my son and we ate him.
That's your teaser. That's your promo right there.
Stop it. You'll have to come back next week. If you want to read about how we got to it. The baked kids. Not good. All right. I put it up there. It's my fault. All right. See you, everybody. All right.
Bye, everybody.
We'll have some movie screenings coming up, by the way, too. In the next few days, you'll be reading about some of the movie screenings we've got coming up.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Bye.